Welcome to I've Walked in Your Shoes. I'm your host, Jose Antonio Cabrera Tony. It's a special episode today because we've been communicating for a while now that we wanted to have Brother David on, and he's here. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
David and I grew up together I remember from kindergarten and all the way to grade 10, 11 is when I left. And went to school together, church together, sleepovers at Steven's house, your house. I remember going for tuna sandwiches at your house. Your mom made the best tuna sandwiches, is what I tell everyone. And just
all the things that stick.
I didn't remember that part.
it's come a long way. I'm wanted to have Brother David on is because since we started to go back, you have been one of those guys that has always checked up on me and has always asked about how we're doing and has always given advice. And I wanted to thank you for that because you don't know how much that's helped. You, Pastor Walker, Jason DeLeo, and Jessica. I think that's part of the reason why not just the whole forgiveness thing and the feeling refreshed and feeling new. I think that helped a lot with me sticking around, at least, right? And I want to say thank you for that, and appreciate all the prayers and you reaching out and whatnot. That's not the reason we're on here. We're on here because the last few people that we had were prodigals. They left the church, and then over the years they came back. You were one of the few of our generation, at least, that stayed, that stuck around. My first question, my first thought when I was putting it in my head of what questions I was going to ask or if I had some was, what was your thought process, if you remember, of once you saw everyone leaving and what went through your mind?
Yeah. Well, it's a good question. And probably there was a lot that went through my mind. As you mentioned, I was one of the few that stayed of our immediate age bracket. And there was a lot at the time that people were leaving. It was, relatively, in hindsight, short period of time where people were making the same decisions. And I think there was, the first thing I'll say is there were a lot of the same pressures on me that my friends were facing that led them to the decisions that they made. So I was facing a lot of the same things. Another thing is there was confusion, a lot of questioning, what is my path? What is this all about? What's right? What's wrong? All of that going through my head. And then in the midst of that, there was probably turmoil and hurt because those kinds of decisions are life decisions that set your life on certain paths that, take you. And if you're going in different directions, it also separates you from the friends you grew up with.
Yeah.
And so all of that was probably part of the things that were working in me as these decisions were being made.
Yeah. And then you were the same age as us. So that's a lot to take on as a teen because we were still teens.
Yes.
And I can't imagine. I didn't even think of that part, though, that you just said, like, all of your friends are leaving.
Yeah.
And then you're like, what's going on? But what made you stay? What was it?
I wish I had an answer. It's not the first time I've been asked that question.
Oh, okay.
And I'm not really satisfied with an answer that I can give because I wrestle with that. Why did I stay?
Yeah.
When I was dealing with all of the same things, my instant reaction is the mercy of God. Like, it was the mercy of God, but I'm not satisfied with that answer because God's mercies are new every morning for everyone. And so I'm like, that can't be the only answer because the mercy that God gave to me,
Could have given.
he gave to Jose Antonio every single day of his life too.
Yeah.
And every other person that we grew up with and that we know, and every other person that's ever lived. So the mercy of God is one thing for sure, but what else is there that made the difference? Because there has to be a decision element in that as well. Like,
Yeah.
God's mercy was the same to all of us, and by the way, is still there for all of us, and I thank God for that today. But what else was it in the decision process? And I think I don't know if this is too simplified, but I think as I was watching people leave and wrestling, like I said, with the same decisions and the same pressures, and then compounded by the fact that all my friends were also making a decision to leave, and I was kind of being, I guess, left behind, if you could, I think of it that way. I think there were three broad reasons why it seems to me people were leaving. One was that they just, adventure, temptation, whatever you want to call it, there was just an appetite for the things that they didn't have growing up.
Yeah.
And they just wanted to see what it was like.
Yeah.
Wanted to see what it was like to go drinking
See
and
what it's
clubbing and
about.
partying and having sex and all of the things that,
Yeah.
that were there. A second reason is that they were confused. They had questions, they had doubts, not sure about this, who God was, what it was about, and those questions and doubts kind of led them to fall away.
Yeah.
And then maybe the end result of that would be unbelief, whereas, whether you put that in a separate or same category, you just didn't believe, which is another reason why people might leave. And then the third reason was that people were hurt.
Yeah.
And so then it was like those kinds of hurts that, something happened in the church, maybe there's crossways, called out, whatever the cause of the hurt, leadership, disfellowship was a big thing in our generation. And, I know about that and we can talk about that. And so those were kind of the reasons why people were leaving. So then when I think about why did I stay, I face temptation just like anybody else.
Yes.
And so all of the appetites and all of that, you face the same curiosities, the same interests and whatever else. But I think on that part, one is that I'm a little bit, probably growing up, I was fairly fearful. And so I was quick to embrace the kind of the downside risks of the things that we grew up avoiding.
Yeah.
And so I think I probably had maybe somewhat of a natural temperament that kind of held me back from the kind of the adventure of sin, if I can put it that way, that kind of kept me off on that point.
Yeah. If I can cut in, that one thing that you just said there is true, because I remember growing up, anytime that Stephen and I, or Alex and I, or the three of us, or there was some other, we'd want to go do something, and you'd always do the thinking of, okay, so if we do this, right?
These 5 things are going to happen.
This is, it's always going to come back. So no, I'm going to sit this one out. I remember that part. So it's very true that you would think things through, and you would, right? You would.
You weren't quite as fly by the seat of your pants.
You wanted to see what the outcome would be before just jumping in.
Yeah,
that's very true.
And I think that probably saved me a lot.
Yeah.
In that aspect of why people leave, because thinking ahead to the consequences, I've come to believe, in as long as I've lived now, there are a lot of good reasons why we don't do a lot of the things. So that was good, and and then maybe there's some that you can decide. That held me on that first category, I think. The second category around confusion and doubts, I was right there with everybody else.
Yeah.
And whether we talked about it or not, dealt with it or not, I was wrestling with a lot of the same things, because we all, whether we grow up in church or not, like, you grow up and you get to a stage where you have to make your own decisions about life, including what do I believe and all of that. And there are a lot of things about faith that are not easy to understand.
No.
And so there are all of the questions, like, is God even real?
Yeah.
What is God? What is our relationship with God? What's important about the things that we've been taught?
Yeah.
And all of that, like, those questions and those wrestlings were there, and probably the biggest risk for me, honestly, in that season of my life was kind of questioning all of that and going, what is really true and what do I really believe? Who
Yes.
is God really? And is this really real?
Is this really real? That was one of my big questions.
Okay.
Is it really real? Because you'd hear so much of other people saying, well, that's just if you go to some other church, they're teaching something else.
Mhm.
Which one's true? Which one's not?
Yeah.
Right? So that was one of my big things. Is it really real?
Yeah.
But in the end, I've found out that I've stuck true. I know what I was taught, and I know what I believed in, because every time I was in some sort of, not just trouble, but if I was sick, or if my kids were sick or Amanda was sick, I'd message my mom and I'd message my dad, can you pray?
Yeah.
Right? So that's one thing that although at an early age when I left, I was like, oh, is it even, I think that was just an excuse for me.
And
right?
I think it's like I said to you, like, you were raised this way, so that was the foundation that your parents started building for you. But at the time that you left, it wasn't your faith, it was theirs. So regardless of how or when it happened, and the same for you, it wasn't your faith at the time, it was your parents' faith that brought you there, and you made the choice to stay and start building your own faith.
Yeah.
And building on that foundation, instead of saying, okay, we're just going to leave this at the foundation stage, and we're going to go build our own house over here.
Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest difference, is that your faith continued to build, whereas your faith kind of paused.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a really good point, because we do all have to face that. And I had to face that because I was at the same stage that, I call you Tony, that Tony was at, right? At the relatively same time.
Yeah.
And I had to go through that process. And so then again, thinking about why did I stay? I think there, a couple of things I would say on that. One is I had some experiences already by that point in my life with God, that I had felt enough of the touch of God in a deeply personal way that even as I was questioning, and even as my rational intellectual mind was grappling with the philosophical questions of faith and what that is, there was something deeper in me that's like a visceral understanding that there's something here that's holding me.
Yeah.
And I've got to hold on to that. And which kind of leads me to the other point that I would make on that is I remember specifically one time where I went to the church and, people, and there was one particular friend that had just made a decision to leave. And it was kind of like after a series of them, and this is one of my closer friends. And I'm just like kind of at my wit's end because I'm wrestling through this, but I'm kind of already kind of going to this feeling like like everybody's leaving and and I'm dealing with stuff myself, but there's something that just I've got
something that's holding on to you.
That's holding on to me.
Yeah.
And I remember going to the church after finding out about this friend that I was referring to, and going to I take you to the place on the altar, not right now because we're in renovations right now, but to the very place where I knelt down and I had just an honest conversation with God. And I said, God, like, this is what's happening. These are the people. These are the questions. Like, I don't even know.
Yeah.
I don't even know God.
Yeah.
But I don't have anywhere else to go.
Okay.
I can't. And I thinking about Peter's words when Jesus was feeling the same thing, because incidentally, a lot of people left Jesus when he was in his ministry. I think it's in the book of John somewhere. And there came a point where Jesus, you can almost feel his heart, where he's like turning to his disciples and saying, will you also go away?
Yes.
And Peter's answer was, God, like, to whom would we go?
Yeah.
And I remember having that prayer with God and just having that conversation and saying, God, like, there's a lot of things I don't know. Like, I don't know what's right or wrong. I don't even know if you're there. I don't know if you're real, but I've got nowhere else to go. And so I can only stay. And if you're there, just, if you can just help me with all of this.
Help me with all this. Yes.
And I feel like I met with God there. And there was a real definite sense of God hearing me and reassuring me at that time. That led me through. And that wasn't the only time there, but it was a critical, there are key points, and that was probably a key point that led me down the road of dealing with the questions and confusions and going along to where as time went on, learning that walking with God and having faith in God isn't about knowing all the answers to all of the questions.
Yeah.
Which I think we probably had a lot of that mentality just by the way we grew up.
Yes.
That it was a lot of certainty, a lot of definition, a lot
Yeah.
of that. And it was a process of me, like from that point and that season of my life, learning that actually that's not really the walk of faith, because we walk by faith and not by sight.
Yeah.
Meaning that the faith walk has a lot of uncertainty inherent to
Yes.
it.
Well, I think to that point, I think the unfaithful walk
Yeah.
is a lot easier because you get that immediate gratification. In most of your actions,
Yeah.
you get an immediate gratification for it.
Yeah.
Oh, you do something illegal? Well, you're going to get arrested.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's what happens if I do that. You go out and you drink too much at the bar. Oh, I get drunk. Okay, that's what happens when I do that. Oh, like you go through all of those stages in life, and there's an immediate consequence or an immediate action to what you've done.
Yeah.
Whereas in faith, it's not always immediate.
Right.
No, it's not
Sometimes
always
there
immediate.
isn't an answer.
Yeah.
Sometimes there isn't a thing that happens when you pray, or sometimes there isn't something that happens when you ask for it, and that creates more questions. And so I think it's interesting that you say that, so much of faith is blind. It is, and it's easy to see how living not with faith
Yeah.
is almost more gratifying
Mm-hmm.
at times, especially when you're young and questioning things, because you're getting that response.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think there is that probably just a human nature sense that's
Right.
heightened in our early
Right.
life. Because as you age, you start to realize that's just not how life is anyway.
Yeah.
But-
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
But there
Very
is
true.
something in our human nature that craves that certainty.
Yeah.
And it makes me think I heard somewhere that, a lot of people, and very commonly, we would rather be certain about something wrong than unsure about something right.
Yeah.
Because it's easier when we know, like,
Yeah.
even if what we know is not true, it's like the certainty gives us something to rest on.
Yeah.
Uncertainty just makes us uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate what you said, Amanda, because it is like, and that's something that I've learned over time.
Yeah.
That faith is actually, it is a hard life. But it is, and people talk about blind faith, but I've come to think it's not actually blind, because they're really aware of the uncertainty.
Yeah.
Like it's not just that we're putting blinders on and just like, pretending la la la.
Yeah.
It's the growth of faith, and learning this faith life is about becoming aware that there are uncertainties that you can't resolve.
Yeah.
There are things that you won't have definite answers to, and I'm not blind to that.
Mhm.
Right.
But I am learning to accept that and to live in
Yeah.
that reality,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that's been, I'm speaking now 20, however long since we've made these
24?
decisions, 24, 25 years later,
5 years later.
and there's a lot of learning and growth, which is, another thing that I've thought a lot about is just that how time unfolds and,
Yeah.
and you grow, and we all grow,
Yeah.
I've grown as much
Yeah.
as you've grown, and we're all growing. That's one of the things that I've learned over time. But going back to that decision time, like I can look back on that now, but in that time, that was very hard
Yeah.
Yeah.
to say. But there was something gripping me that was just like, even though my best friends
Mm-hmm.
are making decisions that I know in order to stay with them, I'll have to make the same decision.
Mhm.
But if I make a decision to stay, our lives are going to start drifting.
Yeah.
Because we're just not doing the same things,
Yeah.
pursuing the same goals. And that's just kind of how life goes.
That's how life goes. Yeah.
So that kind of kept me, I think, the fact that I wrestled those things with God and took them to
Yeah.
God, combined with the benefit of, kind of the early experiences of encounter with God,
With God. Yeah.
that I kind of had those as anchors that kind of held me
Mhm.
moored when other people were unmooring from the faith of their family.
Mm-hmm.
And then that leaves the third thing, which is hurt.
Mhm.
And it's interesting actually that right around the same time of my life, there was probably the first instance of experiencing a really significant hurt. And that led to a struggle with bitterness that I was kind of going through around the same time. I can't remember the exact things, but a lot of the hurts, and and when I saw my friends going, things that, treatment that they had, you mentioned disfellowshipping or different types of mistreatment or whatever you want to call it. All of that is also part of my history. I was never subject to that, probably because I was that cautious kid.
You were the cautious kid. You were the cautious kid. Yeah.
Which, what I'd say to that is it's not that I didn't struggle. It's just that my struggles were a lot more private. And when I did venture, it was a lot more concealed. Right?
Yeah.
So probably saved me some of my own pain.
Absolutely.
But there were still, I've again come in later life to believe I don't think you can escape life without getting hurt.
No.
And without getting hurt by people you love and people who are really important to you, and people who maybe really have a lot of sway over your life.
Yeah.
And so I was dealing with that at the same time too. So then I'm like, okay, so why didn't I leave? Because of that.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things is what I just talked about with the faith struggle, is that already there was starting to be something in me that was like, you know what, there's something bigger than my hurt.
Yeah.
There's, and as much as this is painful and as much as it's unfair, whether it is or actually is or isn't unfair, I think is kind of beside the point. You feel the unfairness.
Yeah.
And so you're dealing with all of that, but as I'm dealing with that sense of injustice, the hurt, and starting to try to figure out the bitterness that was getting up in my own heart because of that, I still felt like, but there's something else. Like there's something more than that.
Yeah.
And I think it was that kind of an awareness of a larger frame. It's like my hurts are like right here in front of my face and it's all I can see, but I have enough awareness that there's a bigger atmosphere
picture
behind that.
Yeah.
That gave me, I think, the context to try to find a way to deal with the hurts and the bitterness in a different way.
So, having said that, how did you deal with that bitterness, and what advice would you give to those that are feeling that bitterness and are still holding on to that bitterness? Because to tell you the truth, there is quite a bit of bitterness and hurt still out there from those times that we would get disfellowshipped, or we would get stood up, or we would get told that we can't hang out with our friends and whatnot, right? So what would you say to those people, and could you just let us know how you dealt with it at the time?
Let me maybe start with how I process that and then kind of work around, because I know I know what bitterness is like. And so I know that bitterness comes from a sense of injustice. And when you try to speak to that, the instant reaction is, but that's not fair. And so just bear with us.
Absolutely.
Just bear with me. And
just bear with us.
Let me fumble my way through this. So I think when I dealt with it, one thing is endurance. And just like you have to persevere. And in that perseverance, there's a particular direction to it that I think you have to be honest with yourself. Here I'm saying you. I realize I had to be honest with myself about my own bitterness. And I had to get to a place where my focus wasn't on the injustice or the perception of injustice against me, the offense against me. And I had to change my focus to the bitterness of my own heart. And in order to do that, I had to be willing to say whether or not that was right or wrong. I can have my thoughts about that, but I can't let that govern what happens in my own heart. And so I had to get to a place where I had to be able to set aside the sense of offense and injustice to me, which is really about your own self and preserving your own self anyway. But I had to get to where I can't focus on that. And I had to say, that's bigger than me. I'll have to let God deal with that part.
Yeah.
Because God's the only perfect judge and he's the only one that's right. And he'll have to figure out how to sort that part out. My task is, how do I purify my own heart?
Yeah.
Because to be honest about the bitterness is to recognize that I'm actually suffocating my own life.
Yes.
Because of something that somebody else did to me.
Yeah.
And that just, when you think about it rationally, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But in the grip of it, you're so caught up by that sense of injustice that that's really hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow I managed to see that, which again, I think was that being able to see something beyond.
Yeah.
That there's something bigger than the hurt.
Yeah.
Right? There's something bigger than what this person did to me.
Yeah.
That motivates me to say, then how do I get beyond that and get to a place where I guess the next thing I would say is forgive.
Forgive.
Yes. How do I get to the place where I can forgive and forgive someone that may not even know they did me wrong?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And be okay with that. And that kind of led to a whole process of learning about forgiveness and what does it mean to forgive and all of that.
Yeah.
And that was not an easy thing.
No.
I do want to say that was not an easy thing. And it's probably been one of the hardest struggles of my life. And it's been more than once that I've had to go around that block. And what I've learned from that is that it is a work that you have to keep. Bitterness is a pretty deep root.
Yeah.
And when that sets in, to be able, first of all, to set aside the cause of that is really, it takes a lot of courage
mm-hmm.
to do that.
Not only a lot of courage, it takes a lot, but I think it takes a lot of understanding, maybe, because you don't really realize, like you were saying, it eats at you.
Yeah.
Because that's a huge part that it does eat at you.
Yeah.
That's what I used to say to you. Like when we were talking downstairs, I used to say to you all the time, I'm not hurting them. They're not walking into this building and feeling that hurt. You are.
Yeah.
They're not walking into that situation feeling whatever animosity was there. You're the one feeling it. And unless you have gone to them and said, hey, this situation happened. This was my experience with it. This is how it felt. This is how it happened. Most of the time that other person doesn't even know that they've done you wrong. Mm-hmm. It's in your head that they've done you wrong, and maybe it truly was an action that was wrong, but they didn't realize it at the time. And they don't hang on to it. They don't take it with them wherever they go, but you've taken it with you for 20 years.
20 plus years, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's something that you
call me the ball and chain.
carried around, and I carried it around, and then I didn't realize that it's pretty much doing you more harm carrying it around than anything, especially because you have it inside it, and it's in there, and it builds up, and you don't know when you're going to blow up, and you blame this, but really it's what you haven't released inside.
Yeah.
And it's that. So I didn't come to that realization. You came to that realization in your teens, the bitterness part. I didn't realize this until sometime last year, this year. Last year. And that's like, wow, I wish I would have when you did.
Though for you, you said, like that day was freeing because it was, you knew at that point that you set that all down and you just left it there. Like it can sit on that floor in that sanctuary and it can fester for the rest of eternity. Mm. You're not carrying it. Mm-hmm. It's not your burden to bear anymore. Like you let that go.
And that's powerful.
Yeah.
And for you, like you were at a place in your life where you were ready and you let it go. From what I understand mm-hmm. in your story, you were ready to let it go and you let it go very quickly and you experienced an immediate relief.
That from that service.
Yeah.
Because I was carrying it every time I'd go to church. I'd carry it. I'd walk in and I wasn't happy. I'd relive everything over again.
Yeah.
until I said, you know what? Enough is enough. If I'm supposed to be here and if I'm supposed to continue coming to church, take this away from me, God.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then another thing is, it's not just that, it's understanding. Like you were saying also while we were having dinner there, you were saying it's an understanding as well as the person that harmed you or the person that was not meaning to.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about that.
Yeah, and I think that's something that, for me, I could see that after I won the battle.
Yeah.
That was probably, for me, not something that helped me win the battle.
Yeah.
But it was, well, actually, there are probably at least a couple of instances where, like, different instances that had the same result in my life that led me down a fight with bitterness.
Mm-hmm.
And there may have been in one case there was a conversation along that line that did help me, but it's because I had already dealt with this once.
Yeah.
So we'll assume that, you're dealing with this for the first time. That's something that I became aware of and was able to accept after I kind of got through the fight with bitterness. But it is an important thing to know, and for those that might be listening to this, who are facing bitterness, and I know there's a lot of denial too. When you're bitter, you kind of deny that you're bitter. So keep that in mind.
Yes,
because that's part of it.
That is huge.
And I get that too. So, but just, if this bites a little bit at the heart, then it could be a clue. But just bear with it, because if you are able to win over and get to that place where you free your own heart from that prison of bitterness, one of the things that you'll learn is that in the vast majority of cases where we've been hurt, that hurt was not intentional. And so I learned that there is a difference between the intended impact and the felt impact. And what you felt as deeply hurtful, deeply offensive, maybe even traumatic, may not have been meant for that. Mm-hmm. It may have been an innocent remark, but because of some sensitivity inside of us or some sort of vulnerability inside of us, it struck deeply and wounded us to our core. And the other person didn't even realize. It may have even been a passing remark or just something that was completely outside of their view. And then we're left to live our lives bitter and resentful and, bottled up with all of this load and this ball and chain, as you've said, because of an unintentional consequence. And then, so with that, I had to learn that I can heal. My job is to heal. And maybe this is just coming to me as I'm talking, but maybe it is learning that the task is not for justice, but for healing. That where bitterness arises from that sense of injustice, and there's something, whether or not we've defined it, it's like you're holding something against someone for what they did. And the focus, rather than focusing on, holding it against them or, making them pay by my absence or whatever.
Yeah.
That maybe a better focus would be on, how do I heal the wound of my heart?
How do I get over it?
How do I get over it?
Right. Yeah.
Well, and to that point, if it's that person's intention may not have been bad. That person likely doesn't know that they've hurt you.
Yeah.
They likely don't know that you're carrying this and that you've been carrying it. Mm-hmm. And I think part of that growth and part of that healing and part of that becoming better than you were yesterday, I think a lot of that is facing it too. Yeah. And I think within some of that, I think there's two lenses to it, right? Some of it is things that you've contributed to the consequence. Mm-hmm. And there's things where the consequence truly comes off as unwarranted. And both of those cases, I know in talking with Tony, he's experienced both of those. Mm-hmm. Some where it was, I did that thing and I deserved to get called out for it. And I deserved to get my hand slapped for it because I did it. And then there's the other side of it where it's like, okay, but I didn't do it. Mm-hmm. Or I wasn't the only one that did the thing, but I'm the only one that got the punishment for the thing.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we internalize all of that and we're too afraid to have the conflict conversation with somebody and say, hey, I need to talk to you because this thing happened between us and it really impacted me because blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
We're so scared of that instead of having that 10-minute conversation to clear the air and to get rid of that hurt, we just decide that we're going to put it in a bag and we're going to carry it with us for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think some of that comes with like wanting to heal and wanting to be different and wanting to grow and get through that.
Yeah.
I think some of that comes with that self-reflection too, and knowing what you may have played a part in.
Yeah, I think so. And I think you have to, it has to start with a motivation within you to want to heal.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm picking up on that, like feeling of, that has to be the desire.
Yeah.
The desire has to be, you know what, I want my heart to be whole, whatever else happened. And so to your point, Amanda, I think that is a key that can be helpful in starting that or along the way of the process, is having that kind of conversation.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times these kinds of experiences that are embittering experiences are magnified by the fact that we're not talking about them.
Ourselves about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And not I don't mean just like talking around to sympathizers and kind of like just chattering and magnifying it that way. But you're not actually constructing, having one of those hard conversations and actually facing what it is. And it's another thing that I've learned over time is that what I'm dealing with inside my own head seems really big. Yeah. And then when I start talking about it, it actually brings it down to size. And then there's a pride element of that, which is part of what makes it hard, because it's like, but I want it to be a big thing.
Right.
Right. And that's kind of like, I've spent so much of my mental energy and so much of my emotional energy and maybe years of my life harboring this grievance.
Yeah.
And if it's going to I have to humble myself to be able to say, well, maybe it's not as big as what I had thought it was.
Right.
So that's a challenge that people have, you know, at least that I've had. So it's a challenging one.
One of the things that talking about prodigals and having prodigals on and whatnot, I know that things that we've talked about is something that weighs heavy on you is your brothers, that they are no longer coming to church and part of it. And is there something that you'd want to say to them? Or not just to them, but everyone that has left? To your other friends, to your friend that you were talking about, or to just backsliders, prodigals in general.
Yeah.
Right? What's something that you'd say to them in what church is now?
Okay. I think I guess there's a few things I could say. One thing that I would say, when you say what church is now, I guess it could be in reference to what church was like when you left. Mm-hmm. So say 20 years ago. I mean, the obvious thing is obviously we've been in transition. You know, there's all of the leadership things we can talk about. I think one of the things that I would really like to say is that we have all been learning and we have all been growing. And so what you left 20, 25 years ago didn't just flatline then. Mm-hmm. But, and appreciate my faith in God. Like we have been growing, and I don't mean just numerically growing, but our growth of understanding, our growth of just kind of maturing in kind of how things are and how things ought to be, and learning the lessons of our own mistakes. We have been, and I'll say this as the son who stayed. We've been learning how to be better Christians, how to be better friends, how to be better supports. We have all been on that path.
Yeah.
We've all grown. And so I would say, you know, I can speak for myself, but I think I could fairly say it on behalf of the entire church collective. There's a lot that we've learned
Yes.
in the last 25 years that hopefully have made us better.
Yeah.
And hopefully made us more understanding,
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully also made us more merciful.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I feel this as kind of alluded to some of the struggles in my early life, but they've gone on in life, into my adult life. Things that I've faced have opened my eyes to make me realize the kinds of struggles there are, and you know, and try to be more understanding and compassionate of
Yeah.
the way that life can hit you and what decisions you make as a result of that.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing I'd really like for people to understand. I'd like my brothers to understand, you know, I'd like my friends to understand, is that we have been growing. And I guess if we were going to continue the analogy of the prodigal son, we've been growing the fatted calf so that it's a better celebration when you come home.
Yes.
You know, it's not a skinny, scrawny calf, but
Yeah.
I think there's something more here for you than what you left.
Yeah.
I think that's a really major thing of what I would want to say.
And that's what everything that you said there is very true, because you feel that now. You feel that. You don't feel like, even when we used to come a few times in the years before, it just felt sort of judgy.
Yeah.
Now there is that, what you said, is people are more understanding. There's more love shown. It makes you feel more welcome. And I appreciate that, because it's definitely something that us as prodigals, like I said before, it takes a lot for us to walk in the door.
Yeah.
It takes a lot for us to walk in the door.
Yeah.
It's a lot of baggage that we're hauling through that door too.
Yeah.
And for someone to just be
When it's met with kindness and
compassion, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the first time that I talked to you and you walked up and you listened to me, you took the time to listen. And I don't know, I'm not one to go and share stuff, but you made me feel like it's okay for me to share with you.
Wow.
And I remember I think I even cried a bit. You were there. And that's one thing that a lot of the churches now, a lot of people are like that. They take the time.
What Pastor Walker's been trying to say in his last few messages is that it's a safe place. It's a safe place to bring your hurt. It's a safe place to bring your pain. It's a safe place to come and have joy. It's a safe place to have revival. It's a safe place to be. Regardless of your circumstance and what you're going through and what you're bringing in, that's a safe place to bring it. Yeah. It's a safe place for you. It's a safe place for your family. It's a safe place for all the things and the burdens.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that it took me a long time to understand, that you could find safety in a space like that. Because and for me too, the first few times there, it was not a safe place. It was not a welcoming place. It was not a judgment-free place. But it is all of those things now.
Wow. And that's encouraging for me to hear as somebody who's stayed. And I'll raise my hand as Exhibit A, you know, on the judgmentalism, because that was probably something that I had early in my life, maybe part temperamentally, because there are people in life that are more like there's judgment, if you know Myers-Briggs personality indicators, like judgment is one of them. So there's probably a temperamental disposition, but also just attitudinal. Like there's just some things that I see about my past that I regret in that regard. And I think that really segues into the other thing that I would say, because I really appreciate that observation of how the church is today. And I think, as somebody who stayed, one way of getting there and like thinking about myself is that I've had to face my own failures and my own sins and my own shortcomings, which are not really different than yours. Because the other thing is, as much as you may be left while I stayed, we're still the same. And I am not a perfect man. And over my lifetime, I've had to face my sins. And as I've done that, it had to scrub away any kind of judgmentalism of anybody else where I perceived sin. Because ultimately, first of all, I don't decide what sin is, God does.
Yeah.
But when we're measured against that, I stand equally condemned.
Yes.
But I found the mercy of God.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And because I, as somebody in the church, who stayed in the church and continued to go every Sunday and every Wednesday,
Yeah.
but I was still a sinner.
Yeah.
And I had to come to that realization. And when I had to really face that,
Yeah.
I had to really do that work of repentance and the hard walk. Now, this might have been, you might say, a little bit easier because I still had the surface of,
Yeah.
I was still in the church and all. So, so there is that step that you will have to take that I didn't have to take. But I think what God has done in me, and probably not just me, but if you're feeling that in the culture, that's evidence to me that in our church as a whole, there has been that growth and that revelation of we are all sinners
Nobody's
in
better
need of
than
mercy.
anybody else.
We're not better. I'm not
No.
better than you because I stayed. I'm not better than you because there are things that I haven't done that you've done.
It's just a different path.
It is
Yeah.
different, maybe different types of sins, different things.
Yeah.
But that made me realize when I started realizing the depth of my own sin, then I started getting the understanding of the depth of God's mercy. And then that led me to realize when my Bible instructs me to be merciful, like my Father in heaven is merciful, and I realized how merciful he is to me,
Mm-hmm.
it's made me have to change to say, I have no right to sit in judgment over somebody who has, gotten tangled up in anything.
Yeah.
Because I'm relying on the same mercy that is their hope.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that's just that. Sin is sin.
Sin is
Doesn't
sin.
matter what it is. Doesn't
Yes.
matter how far you go into it. It's still sin.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
thing.
And then that leads to the kind of the answer is like, so what do you do to disentangle the sin? Well, you come to a God that's merciful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And to me, I'm like, I want you to come and find that God.
Yes.
And I think you'll find him here.
Yep.
And I want to be the brother that has a fatted calf ready for you to come.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know, and I've seen it. I've seen it in Tony. I've seen it in other of our friends. I've seen it in people who walked off the street and have never been
Mm-hmm.
part of our church before they walked in for the first time. The way that God frees you from the burden
Yes.
of your own guilt.
Yeah. Drag it all in with you.
Amen.
Bring all that stuff with you.
Yes.
Bring it all there.
Yes.
And it's
Leave
just
it with him.
What else will you do?
Right.
Like where else would you take it? And so I really, it's my heart to want to be the kind of church that does allow for you to come in with all of your baggage.
Mm-hmm.
Come with it. Like, don't stay out there with it and sit with it. Come here, because the other thing you'll find is that if you bring your baggage here, you're going to hear things that will help you know what to do with that baggage.
Yeah.
So you don't have to live with it. And along the way, I'm sure I'm not the only one that's willing to walk with you in that and say, like, just come along. Like you might get rid of that baggage on the first day you step in, or it might take you
Might take
weeks
you a
or
while,
months.
like it
And
did
it doesn't
me,
matter.
but once you do,
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
once that baggage is released,
Oh,
I'm telling you, once that baggage is released, once that weight is off your shoulders,
Let the joy replace it.
I was telling Pastor Walker, I feel like a new person. I was telling him also that I feel like, new converts where when they get all excited and all that, that's how I feel.
Yeah.
And I'm not a new convert really, but that's how I feel. I want to go tell someone about, hey, baggage lost over here or
Yeah.
baggage taken over here.
Yeah. But and yes, and in a way though, maybe you are a new convert, because even though you have experience, like you'd grown up in the church, there was a certain knowledge or whatever, you probably found God in a way that you never knew him before.
Yeah.
And and it makes me think of something that I picked up somewhere along the way of life, that a child, like a Sunday school perception of God is not sufficient to the to the challenges of adulthood,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the problems of adult life.
Mhm.
You've lived a little bit. You've gone through some things. When you come back and you start turning your attention to God from this place of life with all of the things that you've learned, I think what you'll find is a new understanding of God that's way beyond what we learned in Sunday school.
Mm-hmm.
There's things that, well, obviously it's the same thing, but it's just the understanding of it and the experience of it is way beyond
Yeah.
the Sunday school lesson. But you actually experience God maybe in a way you never had growing up.
Yeah.
Because where sin abounds, I discovered that grace abounds even more.
Even more.
There's more grace than you have baggage.
Yes. That is true. Amen. And once you realize that,
It's
realize
that
that,
realization, though.
that's the
Takes
thing
some
is
time.
it
Yeah.
does take some time.
Yeah.
But yeah, wow. What an awesome message. What an awesome episode with Brother David. Yeah, he broke it down from even when he felt like he was hurt. And I think that's huge for a lot of us that left. Seeing it from your side, from someone that didn't leave. That's why ever since I asked you to be part of it, and that I've been wanting is just been waiting for this day, just because I wanted to know too. I wanted to know as well. And I want to say thank you for being on. I appreciate you taking some time to be on an episode, and to you guys that were watching, come check it out. I know it's that first step to walk into the door, through those doors, but if I'm wrong, I'll buy you a coffee.
And we'll save you a seat.
And we'll save you a seat. Stay blessed. I'm praying for you. We love you guys. See you on the next one.